This story took place 2 summers ago. I was walking my dog Albert one night after work. It was something that I did almost every day. Usually I would walk Albert earlier, but I had been working late that day, so I went out just as the sun was setting at about 8:30 p.m. or so. I would walk around the neighborhood and into some other neighborhoods that were close by. It was a pretty nice area with a lot of houses, and normally I'd see a few other people out walking dogs and such, but at this time it was pretty empty. I went about 30 minutes out, but before turning back, I let Albert run around in the grass a little. As I did, I noticed something off in the distance. It was someone wearing a clown costume. The costume was really well done. He was wearing a whole clown outfit, and instead of a mask, appeared to have his whole face painted, and was also wearing a wig. It seemed really weird to me immediately, because it wasn't Halloween, and he didn't appear to be with anyone. He just seemed to kind of be walking up and down the street. Unfortunately for me, I had to walk past him to get home. I waited there at the park for a few minutes to see if he would walk away first, but then Albert seemed to notice him and let out a few barks. Albert is a French bulldog, so he's pretty small and not very intimidating, but he still likes to bark at people a lot. As he did, I saw the clown stop walking and turn his head over to look at us. He then turned his head back and walked away. Once he was gone, I headed back with Albert. I didn't notice the clown at all anymore until about 10 minutes later. I heard the sound of someone walking behind me, not very close, maybe about 100 feet back or so. Immediately, I got a bad feeling that it was the clown. I didn't want to stop and look behind me, so I just kept walking until I got to the next street corner, and when I did, I casually looked behind me to see that it was in fact the clown that was walking behind me. I continued to walk home with the clown tailing a far ways back. The longer he followed me and the closer I got to home, the more nervous I became. For a few minutes, I didn't hear the clown at all, so I turned around and was relieved to not see anyone. But just a few minutes later, I heard the footsteps once again. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of the footsteps change to the sound of someone running. I looked behind me and saw the clown running directly at me and Albert with a huge, creepy grin on his face. At that point, I knew nothing else but to start running myself. I sprinted as fast as I could. Luckily, I'm in pretty good shape, and so is Albert. Even though his legs are pretty short, he was able to keep up with me as I sprinted down the street. I took a turn at the next block, and even though it wasn't the way home, I was trying to lose the clown. Then when I was at the end of that street, I turned again. At last, I stopped hearing the clown and looked behind me to see that he was finally gone. I walked a few more blocks and then went back to the way home. I was checking my surroundings constantly the entire way back. I was so glad to make it back safely without the clown following us, and decided I would try to avoid walking Albert at night from then on. I went to bed that night and slept great. But when I woke up the next morning, I opened the blinds to my bedroom window and noticed something. On my bedroom window, there was a balloon with the string taped to it. I got the chills when I saw it. The creepiest part is that I had slept with my windows cracked open all night, something that I often did during the summertime to get some fresh air in the house. I figured it had to be the clown that left the balloon, and it creeps me out thinking he was outside my window that night. But who he was or what he wanted, I still don't know. My wife and I live somewhat out in the country. It's not super out there, but we have a decent-sized yard with a woods on our property, and we don't have too many houses on our street. One night, my wife had gone to bed already, and I was staying up late watching a sports game on TV in the living room. When the game was over, I turned off the TV and then turned off the lights in the living room. As the lights went out, that gave me a clear image of our front yard, and something caught my eye as it did. I noticed there was someone dressed as a clown, complete with a mask and everything, just standing in the front yard staring directly at me. It was extremely unusual in my neighborhood to see anybody walking down the street, and we had a fairly long driveway, so I was shocked at the sight of a clown in the front yard. He didn't take his eyes off me, and I walked over to the front door. The closer I got, the creepier the clown looked, and I opened the front door just slightly and stuck my head out. He was pretty far away, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I had planned to yell at the clown and ask him who he was and what he wanted, but shortly after I opened the front door, I saw the clown run away and disappear off into the woods. Now this was also concerning, as those were our woods, but I hoped he would just run off and that would be that. I stayed up a little while longer, even went all around the house making sure every window and door was locked before finally deciding I would head to bed. I fell asleep rather quickly, but was woken up sometime in the night by my wife. She said to me, "Do you hear that?" I listened closely, but heard nothing. She then told me that she woke up to what sounded like someone knocking on the front door. Just then, there was more knocking. It was like a really fast and constant knock. Not a very hard knock, but just very constant and rather fast. This time, the knock continued for a good 15 seconds straight before stopping. I figured it had to be the clown. I told my wife about seeing the clown in the yard, and she suggested calling the police. I slowly got out of bed as the knocking started up again. This time the knocking did not stop and just continued at the same fast pace that it had been at before. It was seeming like it was slowly getting louder and louder. I slowly walked towards the living room and tried my best to remain out of sight the entire time of the clown. Once I got there, I could barely see that it was in fact the clown that had returned to the window of the front door. As he continued to knock, I started to hear laughing from the clown, a really creepy laugh. At that point, I yelled in a loud and firm voice that I had already called the police and they were on their way. Of course, I hadn't actually called the police yet, but I wanted to see if I could scare him off. It seemed to work, because I didn't hear any more knocking after that, and he seemed to walk away. I don't know why that clown went to our house, or how he even found us. This story happened years ago when I was a kid. I think I was about 10 years old or so. I remember that my parents took me to this really big park that was sort of near our house. We lived kind of by the city, so the parks were always really crowded. It was a weekend, so the park was especially busy. I think there was some kind of event going on, because there was people everywhere. I remember noticing a clown almost immediately, and the clown waving at me. I was kind of creeped out by clowns, so I sort of waved and then walked away. Me and my parents walked towards another area of the park, where there was a bunch of stuff going on, such as games and even a live band in one area. We played a few games and walked around. There was some food and things like that. It was overall a fun time, and eventually we left to go to the grocery store. After we were done shopping, we were walking back to our car when I noticed there was a van parked a few spaces away from us. And just for a second, I looked over and thought I saw the clown in the driver's seat duck down. It was a little odd to see a clown driving a van. But like I said before, I wasn't much of a fan of clowns, so I just put it out of my head, and me and my parents went home. Later that night at home after dinner, I went outside to play around with my basketball hoop in the driveway like I often did. But when I got outside, I saw a van across the street parked on the side of the road, and once again the clown was driving. He ducked down again when I saw him, but this time he raised his head back up slowly and smiled at me. Then he began to wave. I ran back inside the house as fast as I could and told my parents, but by the time they made it outside, we all saw the van driving away down the street. He never did come back after that, thankfully, but I get creeped out thinking back on that every time.